Mr. Chairman and friends, I am extremely grateful to you, Irfan, and to your colleagues for asking me to pay my tribute to the memory of a person whom I held in great regard and with whom I had a very long friendship and association, and to, of course, to the majority, both in his lifetime and since then. Asghar engineer has ranked as a great man, and for much of his life a far-sighted social reformer. He was humble, charming and righteous, and his integrity was strong and unrelaxing. He wrote and spoke with an air of confident authority, as has been mentioned, about the things he had generally studied and held audiences spellbound. That he had the necessary protean quality of mind is shown in his many writings, where he presents with fervor a wide variety of opinions and convictions. His humor was grim, not sunny, sardonic, not flattering. Dekh zindan se pare, rang chaman shubr bahar, raqs karna hai to fir paon ki zanjeer na dekh. This indeed, I offer a clue. This indeed is the theme of this first Asghar Engineer Memorial Lecture. I talk about prisons, not a very conventional theme that people talk about. I talk about prisoners, and I talk about, not in this section of the lecture, talk about the subjugation of the mind and the body by the colonial authority through the instrumentality of prisons. This is a small section from a book that I am writing on prisoners and colonialism, and I share it with you, a great privilege in sharing it with you for the first time. John Stuart Mill, the 19th century British political thinker, observed that to serve the happiness of others by the absolute sacrifice of one's own was the highest virtue in man. With this perspective in mind, I present before you an array of familiar Indian faces, some of which are not even known, in a new setting, and relate them to the moments of the time. I acquaint many of you with their toil and sacrifices, for only on the background of this knowledge can we measure the magnitude of their contribution to the rise and growth of anti-colonial consciousness. I believe one can do their memory no greater service than making known some of the facts of their life. This lecture does not trace the long, winding path to freedom. I have instead focused on the claims of political prisoners to illuminate and beautify the world with their deeds, or ascribe, as Aurobindo Ghosh did, both their release from prison and their renewed activity to divine power. I discuss their life stories, not of course in this lecture, but elsewhere, about which so little has appeared in print. Their story is, of course, bound with the political stir that took place with the advent of Gandhi, and it is for this reason that they are primarily rooted in a milieu of Indian nationalism. Why did people traverse the jail road when they could have achieved personal glory and advancement by taking a less hazardous route? What encouraged their fraternal attachment and their long life fulfillment. Why did the young M.K. Gandhi forsake his European clothing and adopt the loin cloth? What led Motilal Nehru and Jawaharlal to chasten life and character by passing through the discipline of self-abnegation after non-cooperation? Why did the Ali brothers give up their European attire to wear half moons in their crude grey cap and Khuddam-e-Kaaba badges? Why did they come out of jail just as brave as they went in? Why did Mazharul Haq, who was with Gandhi in England and returned to India by the same boat in 1891, give up his chota peg, wore a beard, and abandoned his palatial bungalow to live in a kacha house near the Ganga at Digha Ghat? Why did C.R. Das give up his princely lifestyle? Was this the agony of servitude? Did he give his individual freedom for a common national freedom? Finally, what does one make of Farkas fetters, grinding prison labor, and solitary cells? My intention in this lecture is simply to indicate the direction in which the reader must search, or the audience must search, for solutions to the very complex problems of the bitter Anglo-Indian encounter. I hint at another crucial debate. For the most part, political prisoners were like a red rag to the bull. Merely to mention them risked immediate loss of attention and audience. But alternative currents of thinking on the political existed as well. Likewise, the colonial legal lexicon that defined all political activities as sedition, just as the present day Indian lexicon defines as terrorism, was aptly contested by, among others, the Marxists, who reasoned that it was no offence to violate the colonial law because it benefited British capital and Indian owners at large property. I tried to confront such assertions, look at the change of tone and emphasis, and set out in a quick historical survey how they came to be preserved. Ghalib had written in the 19th century, "Prisoners of thy tresses, why would I escape fetters? A captive of sorrow, why would I fear the dungeon? If the preacher has locked me, so be it. Shall we ever renounce these ways of love's passions?" Cutting across regions and languages, scores of fellow prisoners mingled with each other and knew just what to write about them. And because so many of them had been in jail themselves, they combined distinct forms of expression in making pathways for new ideas. In Urdu literature, zindan or qaid khana signifies cruelty, an emblem of subjugation. Qaidi or prisoner conjures up the image of victimhood, asir zinda. In other forms, prison becomes a metaphor for parda, a common practice among Muslim women in the urbanized spaces. "We are in prison," said a group of women to Margaret Cousins, founder of the All India Women's Conference. In Muhammad Ali's poetry, the patriot imprisoned is like a caged bird longing for the beauties for the garden of freedom. Writing elegies or marsiya became a powerful medium of public declaration of the present and past tyrannies and transgressions of the rulers. Mir Anis and Amir Dabir in the early 19th century were its best exponents in Lucknow. They were followed by poets like Brij Narayan Chakbas, who adopted the marsiya genre with relative ease. Poets of a later generation used the old symbols in a new context to lead contemporary meanings to repression and subjugation, and transformed political suffering through the imagery of resurgence that followed all kinds of bullying into an optimism rooted in conviction rather than emotion. The executioner signified the British, a commanding and lasting image against authoritarianism and absolutism. Ram Prasad Bismil, a revolutionary, threw his full weight behind the newest and most ardent protagonist of nationalism. He immortalized the lines of a Bihar poet, Sarfarozi ki tamanna, ab hamare dil mein hai, dekhna hai zor kitna, baazue qatil mein hai. People sang this Urdu song with full-throated melody and alarm. The chords of every heart vibrated. There was no let-up. Millions were thrilled by the idea of sacrificing one's head, symbolically castrating oneself for Mother India. Jo kuए यार से निकले, तो सूबेदार चले. Wrote Faiz Ahmad Faiz, whose poem हम देखें, sung by the melodious Iqbal Bano amidst rapturous applause, or the Dastur of Habib Jalib and Ahmad Faraz, Hisar by Ahmad Faraz, are still enormously popular with the masses. It is impossible not to admire these and other dissenting voices and their tenacity. Men and women in public life use the imagery of Qaidi and Qaidi Qaid Khana to either evoke sympathy or express their defiance. Thus, on the eve of launching civil disobedience in 1930, Gandhi described India as a vast prison house. His sacred duty was to break the monotony of peace, I quote, choking the heart of the nation for the want of free wind. As for progressive writers and poets, they were in the forefront in Urdu literature, arguing that creative writing ought to be the servant of a cause, a beacon to poor humanity's afflicted will, and not a mere display of ornamental skill. A wide group with a broad-minded realism, they gave the impression of the prisoner and the prostitute being equals. Josh Mariabadi, who returns to the subject of prison again and again in order to arouse us from our thoughtless indifference, treats the world of the prisoner with a lively and artistic interest. In Zinda Ke Geet, he expects the hour of victory to draw closer and closer so that the masses would breathe and partake of the intellectual and cultural life. Shikast-e-Zinda Ka Khwab, on the other hand, pictures the world coming to an end to be replaced by a better place to live in, thanks to the prisoner's answer for tyranny. In A Dream of Prison Break, and addressed to the sons of the East India Company, he enunciates his theory for reconstruction in the following lines. Behind the facade of the destruction of this fossilized man, the work of creating a new man is in progress. How India's prison quivers as the slogans reverberate. Some peeved prisoners perchance are breaking their chains. How beneath the bulwarks all the captives congregate. The tumult of lighting in their hearts. Their hides are burnished swords. The famished have fire in their gaze. The cannons have gone cold. Fate eloquently favors the prisoners. Failing are the tactics to dominate. The eyes of the beggars are ruby red. The rulers' visage colorless. Wreckage has unfurled its flags. Constructions have fallen prostrate. Did those who crushed the nation's soul ever in their dreams speculate that the earth will ooze out poisonous snakes, sky would shower swords? Did those who pilfered blood from human hearts, even in their dreams, anticipate that one day the same monochrome would churn out million images? Did those who fettered the human speech, even in their dreams, cogitate that one day the same silence would breed speeches that would resonate? Watch out! The prison vibrates. Rush! The prisoners are at large. Rise! The way walls are crumbling down. Run! The chains are breaking free. In A Prison Nightfall and A Prison Daybreak, Faiz Ahmad Faiz captures the extraordinary optimism amidst war and tyranny and echoes sentiments that transcend time and space. He wrote 2 elegies in memory of a young progressive who perished in jail. He is imagined to be speaking in his own person. Mulaqat, or meeting, became a prisoner's term for a visitor to see him. शाम के पेचुखम सितारों से जीना जीना उतर रही है रात, यूं सबा पास से गुजरती है जैसे कह दी किसी ने प्यार की बात। सहने जिंदा के पेच बेवतन अशजार, सरमगू महमह बनाने में दामने आसमां पे नक्श निगार, शाने बाम पर दमकता है मेहरबां चांदनी का दस्त जमील। यूं ही हमेशा खाक में घुल गई है आब नजूम, नूर में घुल गया है अर्श का नील। सब्ज गोशों में नील गूं साए लहलहाते हैं जिस तरह दिल में, मौजे दर्दे फिराक यार आए। दिल से पैहम ख्याल कहता है इतनी शीरी है जिंदगी इस पर, जुल्म का जहर घोलने वाले कामरा हो सकेंगी आज न कल। जलवा गाहे विसाल की शमे वो बुझा भी चले आगर तो क्या, चांद को गुल करे तो हम जाने। During the war, an anthology entitled Azadi, the Nazme of Poems of Freedom, contained many such stirring poems. They were recited till late in the evening in the jails to the accompaniment of much wit and banter. Even the wardens couldn't help being moved by the following lines of Sardar Jafri, who was in Lucknow jail at that time. Dance, O spirit of freedom. For all life, the universe is dancing. The universe is whirling on the axis of time. Where does a historian like me situate Indian jails? They were, I believe, metaphors for broader social practices for the construction of colonial knowledge and sites of medical experimentation and observation. But they also administered rapid retribution, public executions, public flogging and labor in fetters aimed at the bodies of Indian subjects, and were preferred over calling upon troops or law courts. As a result, the bureaucratic machinery of the colonial regime, wrote Aurobindo Ghosh, grinds slow or grinds fast, but grinding is its object. I do suggest that we need to place prisoners in a fluid category, forming at the intersection of local, regional, pan-Indian and implicitly colonial. If a prisoner had to give up home, he did more than change his address. He had to cut himself from the outside world, had to learn to adjust to quote-unquote new persons, had in short to create a totally new life in the barrack. It is not the loss of a profession of status that alone and by itself was painful, but rather another way of living which required readjustment. As Felix, I'm not able to pronounce this Polish name, Zinski, the Polish revolutionary, Lenin's comrade in arms, remarked, "I am calm enough, yet the strange tranquility is utterly at variance with these walls and with the things from which they have separated me." The point is that everyday life has been replaced by vegetative existence, activity by introspection. I now move to these hints, more or less to the final section of this lecture. The colonial system refused to recognize the bravest and most daring fighters because it suffered from what the historian C. Bailey calls information panic. The argument, the government, wrapped up in its ruling concerns, raised the whirlwind without being able to ride the storm. What is more, the colonial system could not be adjusted to. Like an iron pillar, it could only be broken. As long as we continue to be afraid of bloodshed, says Prabhu Sevak in Munshi Premchand's Rangbhumi, our rights too will continue to be afraid to come to us. They too can only be protected by bloodshed. The region of politics is no less terrible than a battlefield. To enter into it fearing bloodshed is cowardice. In another passage, Vinay goes to Rajasthan with Seva Dal volunteers and is promptly put in jail. New ideas sowed the seeds of discontent that transformed itself into a revolution. For all that, freedom fighters were strong, determined and dedicated, willing to make a better world for the toiling masses. Most delved deeply into life, were determined to battle for it, and turned their immense energies and dominating personality to give up their spirits. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit in her memoirs paid a huge compliment to the constant pilgrimages to prison. She talked of the favored few whom prison could not break because their passions for freedom enabled them to soar beyond the locks and bars of jails. This sovereign virtue, as Jawaharlal called it, led them to find good things in jail, to purchase one's continued existence by compromising with the illegality and injustice went against the grain of Subhash Chandra Bose. In other words, it was necessary to have the conviction of the need to suffer, to go to prison for freedom, and to have the strength to experience the horrors of life. Muhammad Ali called jail as the gateway to freedom and took pride in frequenting so many of them. Poochte kya ho budo bash ka hal, hum hain bashinde jail khane ke. He thus found a haven of refuge in the Karachi prison, where the wicked ceased from nothing, and from that of the wicked the weary had some rest. He had been imprisoned, he said, for denouncing the injustices that had been perpetrated in India and on Islam by the British. And now he must denounce them still, even if it meant returning to prison. Indian nationalism often ended where it started. Glorification of prison going as a commanding value. Writers remembered, quote unquote, the finest specimens of the nationalists, who quoted arrest only out of a sense of gallantry. Hence the British, hence the Congress, and other political parties organized a relief for political victims, idealized prisoners, their courage, their principles and their boldness, and on the other hand celebrated when the four satyagrahis from Krishna district in Andhra refused to apologize for their conduct, or when MP Narayanan Menon of Kerala spurned the offer of unconditional release in January 1929. Men may break, Gandhi was to say on the eve of the Quit India movement, but they should not bend beyond rude force. I hope we do the same after the 16th of May. The values permeating the prisoners' world provide an attractive alternative to the cold and hierarchical prison structures. Some maintained the greatest serenity, faced bereavement, however well camouflaged, without flinching, and embodied the finest aspects of their cultural heritage. Quite a few received the sentence of rigorous imprisonment with a smile, their wounds healed on the very day of freedom. How with heads erect they walked along the street, a Calcutta newspaper remarked. Without a doubt, a great many had faith in what Gandhi had said to them, and he had said, we should consider it our good luck if we are sent to jail for the good of our country, for preserving our honor, for observing our religion. And as prisoners lived behind iron-barred cages and hoped for a better future, they did not care much for the life that was denied to them. Among the conclusions that one would like to draw is the fact that these descriptions, some of which I have offered before you, it is clear that in such descriptions is the eternal illusion that India would cease to move without them. So they stood on its shoulders and were eager to make others follow their path. Aurobindo Ghosh claimed that he had earned a higher place in society owing to his birth, training, public role, martyrdom by imprisonment, and especially because God chose him to the glorious and important work. In prison, he learned from an inner voice that he was to have a worldwide purpose. His visions and communications with God were the good that came out of confinement and were the basis for his claim that a new man, a new Aurobindo, emerged from the Alipur ashram in May 1909. In like manner, Tilak thought that higher powers ruled the destiny of men and nations, and his incarceration would serve in the country's interest better. Others talked of the most cultured classes going through its rigors, claiming that it was not them, but indeed the British Empire that was on trial before the world. A much romanticized picture emerges from others who carried the conviction that sacrifice was often a cloak for many actions that did not always stem from the highest motive. In fact, many wore it to hide what lay beneath. This is indeed true of some civil servants who claimed, as did Dharmavira, that the civil servant did their very best to serve the national cause. Whether they did or did not is a contentious issue. But people did ask, how were the lackeys of the erstwhile white foreign rule going to be treated in independent India? Many wondered what would be their fate of those who had sent freedom fighters, including Dharamveer, to prison for violent activities. The fact is, and it's an unfortunate fact, according to me, that these men did very well in free India, perhaps even better than before. The first Congress government did nothing to clip their wings, which it should have done. In fact, it signalled its intention by appointing Gilja Shankar Vajpayee as the first Secretary General of the Ministry of External Affairs. The Madras government gave the British members of the ICS stay for an indefinite period on the same terms as before. Thus, Peter Gwynne was stationed in the Nilgiri district from mid-1947 to the end of 1949, first as sub-collector Kulur and then as collector Utikumund. We were still independent. On the other hand, the fate of other freedom was a rather mixed one. And I want to draw your attention to this, because this again is a forgotten story. There were of course those who were justly honoured and rewarded, but many like Yudnulal Yagnik eschewed the exhibition of formal sentiments as well as appearances of honour. With the world appearing insubstantial and the colour of politics false, as indeed it is today, he was not only aniket, homeless, but also akinchin, without any material position. Saifuddin Kichlu, Jawaharlal's contemporary at Cambridge, did not reach for anything beyond his grasp. He bagged no prize trophies, earned very little, and secured no position. And his grave in Jamia was repaired only recently. Jawaharlal loaned him some cash and recommended a reduction of his rent at 12 Wellington Crescent. But like many others in his generation, he bowed out of history with the sense of disillusionment with partition and the bloodbath that followed. In the words of Akhtarul Iman, the Urdu poet, the earth is not the same, nor the sky, not the day and night. The boundaries of grief sometimes shrink, sometimes expand. The world has stopped where no day and night, no stagnation or frenzy are found. The stars call and the earth beckons. My existence still flees from everything. I hope that life would not become an autumn-tinted spring or poisoned wine. India is a strange land, observed Bose in April 1939, where people are loved not because they have power, but because they give up power. Nobody does that now. As a matter of fact, scores of people avoided the highways of service and fame and treaded the footpaths of mud tracks of humble service of the forlorn. This applies to many Gandhians. Vinoba Bhave must rank high amongst them. So does K.G. Kumarappa, the economist who went to jail twice for his pungent criticism of British economic policies. The integrity and intellectual strength of the ideologues of the Communist Party of India compels admiration. But while Marxist writers, poets and publicists marched on with wounded fingers and bloodied bodies, present-day historians have conveniently brushed them aside in their narratives. The fact is that scores of left-wingers discarded the hat, suit and boot and the mental habiliments of the master race. Amir Haidar Khan returned to his village in Rawalpindi district and gave up his share of land and property to start a school. Muqimuddin Farooqi, National Secretary of the Communist Party of India for 25 years, was dressed in a white homespun pajama and kurta or long shirt and lived in a couple of dingy, airless rooms above the party office in the heart of the old city, eating frugally and always willing to help anyone in trouble. Similarly, Muzaffar Ahmad and his comrades led a materially precarious and marginalized social existence. The picture of daily life he led is one of chronic poverty, overcrowded living spaces, ill health, lack of funds, house searches, police raids and arrests. Yet, as Farah Gorakhpuri poet says, the loss of freedom got deeply embedded in our minds. He, that is Farah, was disturbed by the plight of his people at home. But, as he wrote pithily, what cannot be cured must be endured. When he came home after his release from jail, he found his family in severe financial distress. Jawaharlal Nehru, then visiting King Gorakhpur and now everybody's enemy, understood his predicament and sent him to Allahabad to run the Congress office. Another poet who went through the same experience and who has set high standards of integrity in public life was Hazrat Mohani. He spoke passionately against the unforgivable scene of petty bourgeois vacillation and absenteeism. His Aligarh college mates remembered him how in 1899 he had got down from the Ekka wearing flared pajamas and his wedding sherwani and holding a pandan in one hand. But Khalajan, nicknamed by the Aligarh boys, gave up his talukadari habits in the course of the anti-colonial struggle to lead a plain and unembellished existence. Early in life, he distributed his properties. He preferred walking even when he called on the Rajas of Mahmudabad and Salimpur. And in April 1939, travelled third class, paid rupees 160 to London to meet the Secretary of State for India and Ramsay MacDonald, the former British Prime Minister. And while attending the Constituent Assembly, this man of idealistic mind, deliberate habits, imperturbable optimism and steadfast will, stayed in a nearby mosque at no cost to the nation. For years, the fetters which bound India to the British had been drawn tighter and tighter. When the deliverance came, the moment of opportunity was put in good use. The final results were all that one could expect. The government granted remission to or released a mix of political and non-political prisoners. While these men and women felt honoured, feasted and welcomed, the nation felt obliged to them. Majroor Sultanpuri waxed lyrical. मुझे सहल हो गई मंजिलें, वो हवा के रुख भी बदल गए, तेरा हाथ हाथ में आ गया, कि चिराग राह में जल गए. Jail-going, trials and executions are an essential endowment of a popular hero in South Asia. Thus, Udham Singh, who the British tried and executed in 1940 for murdering Michael Udaya, received the coveted Nishan-e-Khalsa, and his life story became the theme of a film in December 1999. In the mid to late 60s, the tale of the grand self-sacrifice circulated widely and promoted the Punjabis to remember him in a way fitting for martyrs and heroic exemplars. This kind of adulation extended to public figures in free India, such as Jayaprakash Narayan, who was arrested during the emergency in 1975. One of the main episodes in his life had occurred in 1942, when he climbed down the prison wall on a rope made of dhotis. No one knows where the final destination stands. All we know is that the bell of the caravan is ringing, wrote the Persian poet Hafiz Shirazi. After liberation, what? What about those who received hearty blows with patience, put up with the slights and indignities, or walked gallantly to the cell or the gallows. In their blatantly partisan view, historians have forgotten their part in restoring the liberal foundations of the modern Indian state. In today's India's gold diggers in the political arena have done the same. They remember men and women who have a communal orientation, who nurtured revivalist ideas and who set one community against the other. And we have seen this happen in Banaras in the recent elections. Even today, the ruling cults of personality are in the ancient tradition. The Brahman coming out of his retreat to preach to the poor, or the prince of Kapilvastu forsaking his palace to show the true path of salvation to the lowly in his new incarnation of the Buddha. The hypothesis of the freedom fighter in Free India afforded legitimacy to them as the deliverers of India from colonial rule. As things worked out, New Delhi's National Archives of India is the repository of application for settling claims, loss of jobs, loss of property and disorder. The ICHR runs the project on martyrs and on the Ghadar party. In addition, the Ministry of Culture observes a choice of commemorative events. During the last couple of years, it has spent crores to remind us of the creativity of Tagore and Vivekananda on the one hand, and the energies displayed by Malaviya and others. With innocent children and lazy-looking government servants being herded into Delhi's plush Vigyan Bhavan, one begins to question the purpose and utility of such an exercise. India is, as I have tried to suggest, hardly a hungry nation that is to be fed on the diet of departed leaders or patriots, some of whom have questionable credentials, and that applies, ladies and gentlemen, to Madan Mohan Malaviya also. Which of the two opposing points is correct? I suspect both are true and false. Perhaps the truth lies in one or the other of these two positions. One thing is, however, certain. One should eschew a narrow patriotic glorification of prisoners, and at the same time recognize the forms of solidarity and cohesion they engendered by living together in jail. Moreover, one should study their lives to give a completely different thrust to India's story of freedom and bondage from colonial rule. When this is done, we will be able to understand our liberation struggle better. When this is done, we will be able to understand the nature of colonial rule and its exploitative character, and how, as I said at the beginning of the lecture, it used the instrument of jail to subjugate not only the body but the mind of the Indian prisoners. Fortunately, the British were not successful in their attempts, and India did emerge stronger at the time of independence.